Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and welcome to Topical Talk number 1. About a week ago, I expressed on the community page that there was just a lot of stuff in Path of Exile to talk about, and the pile of stuff to talk about just continually grows. And my notepad that I keep all of my different discussion topic ideas just keeps getting longer. And so the only way I can possibly talk or even mention all of this stuff is in sort of a topical talk where we round everything up and at least say a few words about each of these different topics. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go through 8 different particular topics and bring up some different things. Some of them are about specifically about builds. Some of them are economics related. Some of them are about game development. And some of them are just about cranky old men complaining or suggesting things. Speaking of suggestions, if you're new to the channel, you can of course like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about future video discussions just like this one. And throughout our discussion today, if you've got thoughts, comments, or feedback, or you'd simply like to interact at all with any of the things that we're chatting about, feel free to drop us a comment down below and I'll get back to each of the comments as time allows. Our first topic today is a really quick one. It's mechanical and it's Summon Reaper. A lot of players, when Summon Reaper first came out, we were all excited for it. We started chatting about it on the forums, on Discord, and on various other outlets. And then basically we tried to play Summon Reaper like it was a Summon Spectre. A lot of players made the mistake of playing Summon Reaper like it needed to be boosted up through gem levels, and that's primarily where it would get its damage from. That's typically what you do with Summon Spectre builds that rely on various OP minions inside the game, whether those are slave drivers or syndicate operatives or something else. Typically pumping gem levels is the way to go for Spectres. However, that is not the way to go with Summon Reaper. You want to play Summon Reaper like a dot bleed based minion. That's where its biggest sources of damage can come from. So for this point, a lot of players have made the mistake of looking around and simply not understanding what hypothermia support can do interacting with bleeds, that it is a huge multiplier for bleeds since your damage with ailments scales up with hypothermia support. A whole bunch of players that are on the top ranked ladder on POE Ninja for experience are using hypothermia as a support for Summon Reaper. And I would just encourage you, if you have tried playing Summon Reaper, maybe you've tried pumping gem levels into it, maybe you've tried more traditional summoner approaches to Summon Reaper, one of the ways to get better damage out of your Summon Reaper, especially for bosses, this thing can annihilate bosses. I've tinkered with my particular Summon Reaper build on standard using a bunch of legacy gear. And of course, you can feel free to shout down below that I'm playing in standard with it. But it can eviscerate bosses pretty quickly when you pump the dot damage up and focus on that rather than gem levels. Okay, our second topic today is game development as games versus game development as spectator entertainment. I've got a couple different little paint masterpieces, paint attempts, depending on where you fall on my artistic skills and my artistic thoughts. But basically, this subject is something that is very near and dear to me. I think that there is a big discrepancy between designing games to be played versus games to be watched. Games themselves that place an emphasis on the player playing the game will automatically have different priorities, different features, and different points of emphasis than games that are made to be watched. We live in a time and in an age where esports and viewership is a big part of game development and games marketing. And so in the development process of a game, one of the things that oftentimes game development studios or companies or even indie devs are thinking about is, hey, how does this game look and what is this game like to view? What is the experience like to view this game? Not just to play it, but to view this game. It is something entirely different going on psychologically when we as human beings watch something versus when we as human beings exercise control over something. Those are two fundamentally different experiences. And so I know a lot of folks have been confused when I've brought this up or mentioned this in posts or on Discord and other places. This is what I'm talking about here. There's two fundamentally different motivations potentially driving a developer as they develop. Now, it doesn't always mean that these two things are at odds. Oftentimes, a good game can also be a good thing to view and enjoy simply as a spectator. But sometimes when the rubber hits the road, there are going to be decisions that need to be made about whether or not a particular feature, a particular aspect of gameplay, a particular part of an experience is going to be more catered towards a player or a viewer. That's what I'm talking about when I bring up this topic. This topic is a large topic. It goes beyond Path of Exile. But we've seen Grinding Gear Games a couple of times along the way over the last year make some decisions that were maybe more in favor of Path of Exile as a spectator form of entertainment than as a game itself. We've even had words like vicariously, the word vicarious being used when describing players or spectators watching other players play Path of Exile. That is a word that has been used by Grinding Gear Games, and I think it's an appropriate word. I think it's a good word. I don't think it should be seen as a dirty thing that Grinding Gear Games is talking about what it's like for a viewer to live vicariously through a streamer. I think that's incredibly transparent and open, and I think that's something that not a lot of people are thinking about or chatting about. So it's definitely something that I think is helpful to think about and chat about as players who are playing the game and seeing decisions that are getting made, maybe that don't make sense to us because we're players. Maybe sometimes there are decisions that do make more sense as spectators. Anyway, enough on that topic for today. All right, our third topic today is totems. I said that I was playing totems. I was trying totems out here during 3.15. I was playing a hardcore character with totems. And Forbidden Rite, that was the particular skill that I was using because everybody suggested it and said it was a great skill. And I wanted to really play something that was a new skill this league. So I thought, okay, well, I'll try totems out. And Forbidden Rite can go on totems. So we'll see how that works out. That's a playstyle that I'm not exactly as familiar with as some other playstyles in Path of Exile, whether that's playing support characters or summoner characters. And sure enough, Forbidden Rite is the closest I'll ever get, I think, to enjoying totems. Notice I'm not saying that I enjoy totems, and I'm not saying that I hate it either, but I think Forbidden Rite, which a lot of folks right now are commenting and essentially saying, oh my goodness, play Forbidden Rite while you can because it's going to get nerfed. Like, if this is the strongest totems can get, then I think this is an accurate moment for me to step back and say, okay, if this is totems when they're strong, I probably just don't like totems all that much in compared to other sorts of play styles. Most often, I found myself really enjoying playing totems by simply being able to place totems in disadvantageous places where monsters couldn't necessarily hit me. So using my surroundings wisely, placing totems around a corner or through a doorway. I was playing it hardcore, so I really wanted to keep my character alive. My character is still alive, but again, I simply didn't have that itch to play Path of Exile and to jump in playing this totem character. It's just not a build style and a play style that really calls to me. And if this is really powerful totem gameplay, then that's good. I'm glad I got to play it. I'm glad I got to try it out and give it a good go, and then simply discover that it's not a play style that's that thrilling for me to enjoy. Doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy totems. Don't hear what I'm not saying. If you enjoy totems, I'm glad you enjoy totems. And yes, you should probably play Forbidden Rite before it gets nerfed. Our fourth topic today is POE and Grinding Gear Games Communication History Recap. This is something that I want to do at some point. It needs to be approached in its own entire discussion video where we really showcase the difference basically between Grinding Gear Games communication patterns and their approach prior to COVID, during COVID lockdowns, and then even as we move on post-COVID and development cycles post those immediate lockdowns. And I'm talking about immediate lockdowns in New Zealand that were affecting Grinding Gear Games, not necessarily lockdowns or changes in policies throughout the rest of the world. I'm talking about specifically things that would have impacted the hiring process as well as the workflow process for the team at Grinding Gear Games in New Zealand. There used to be a definite pattern basically during the 3.0 and even during the 2.0 build-up cycle. There was a definite pattern of communication. There were some tweaks along the way, but there was some pretty consistent behavior with each particular league and with each particular annual expansion. That then had to change, which is very understandable. There's no critiques there. A lot of things had to change for a lot of really good reasons, for a lot of good workflow reasons. And then we've seen yet another change of where we're at now, where Chris Wilson is being incredibly generous, I think, with his time towards the community. He is reassuming the role of being the face of Path of Exile and of being the lead communicator for returning players and for players who are interested and have got their hooks in PoE and whose PoE hooks, are in them, as it were. Shout out Chainhook. Like, Chris is doing a great job of that. Chris Wilson is doing a great job of that. Don't hear, again, what I'm not saying. But this is definitely a different pattern of communication right now, what we're experiencing, where essentially every week or two, we're getting the lead developer, the CEO of Grinding Gear Games, going on community-driven podcasts and discussions and trying their best to interact and answer questions and provide some sort of give and take discussion between the top levels of Grinding Gear Games and the rest of the player base that's invested in those particular events. This is a different communication pattern than what we've seen from Grinding Gear Games in the past. It's interesting. And it's interesting to note maybe where this is going to lead. But I think a lot of players have joined Path of Exile over the last year to 2 years. And so I think for some, they might benefit from a little bit of a history recap about what GGG used to do and why this is such a shock, a startle, a surprise, an exciting thing about where we're headed moving forward and where we're at right now even. All right, fifthly, designing characters for specific content. This is a topic, frankly, that has been on my list for about 2.5 years now. It needs to be its own discussion video. It needs to be its own playlist, frankly. This is something that Grinding Gear Games has taken time throughout the last couple of years to systematically kill, nerf, buff, reintroduce, kill, nerf, buff, reintroduce. It seems like we're kind of in just an interesting design space where essentially a new archetype for player characters will come out. Now, some of these you may be more familiar with, some of them you might not be. Maybe you've got a character that's a boss killer. That is a character who is dedicated to killing bosses. If someone plays that sort of character and says, oh, this character's clear sucks, you know that. You're already aware of that. Your intention with the character is not to clear the Atlas. It's not to take down packs. It is to take down the biggest, baddest bosses that your level of investment on that character can possibly do. It's there to delete single target or specific encounters that you would like to fight against. That's different than, let's say, an all-arounder character, somebody who wants to be able to go at a decent level of speed through maps, who also wants to be able to take on bosses, who wants to have a good level of DPS, who also wants to have a good level of tankiness and survivability. That is a completely different character than your boss killer. Both of those characters are completely different than an aura stacker or a support. We've seen some overlap here over the last year or two, most recently, with aura stackers, and what typically are support characters simply becoming their own standalone characters. And that's gotten more and more out of control with the introduction of Delirium Cluster Jewels. But you can see here that there are different archetypes that help you do and accomplish different tasks, different goals, and tackle different content in specific ways. It used to be, when Delve was first released, that several different community content creators and build design creators came up with the idea to have a darkness farmer, some sort of character that would actually maximize on speed, that was invulnerable to the darkness inside Delve. Delve did a big old dot. It did a whole bunch of damage to you, but there was a way to balance it such that you would actually not die. You would not actually interact with the monsters in the darkness. You wouldn't kill them, as it were. You wouldn't try to draw them. There was phasing was involved in order to be able to move quickly and move through units. And then you would simply run down different nodes and collect fossils. It was a relatively low-level farming strategy that was very useful in Trade League to actually have a steady flow of fossils, and it was something that players could do in order to jumpstart other characters, right? If you needed currency for, let's say, a boss killer or a support character or an all-arounder or something else, you could build a darkness fossil farmer to go collect fossils and then sell those fossils in bulk via trade in a trade scenario. Or if you were SSF at that point, you could simply use a darkness fossil farmer in order to grab fossils for yourself to craft. Like, these are different characters that are built and tailored to take on specific content. The Zoom Zoom Magic Finder, like there's the Zoom Zoom character that we're all familiar with that can simply do a ton of damage and wants to clear things quickly. But then on top of that, there's a sub-archetype of that is also the Zoom Zoom Magic Finder that typically would farm divination cards, stacking Magic Find for item quantity in specific zones. Sometimes you would stack item rarity, but the vast majority of the time for the life cycle of Path of Exile during 2.0 and 3.0, at least up until now, has been Magic Finders. That low-level farming strategy, and almost all low-level farming strategies and specific characters have been taken out of commission, nerfed out of commission, or simply moved into a space where it's no longer very efficient for players to do. Again, all of these different characters would take on different content, and in the economy side of things, from a softcore trade perspective or even a hardcore trade perspective, each of these characters fulfilled a different role inside Path of Exile, and as such helped the economy in a different sort of way. Supply and demand could actually be interacted with through character design and through your choices as a player about which sort of content you wanted to tackle. And that seems to be something, again, that cyclically, wow, say that 10 times, in a cycle, it seems to be that we go through cycles where specific builds pop up for specific content, they get nerfed, they get killed, a new archetype comes in, they get nerfed, they get killed, something else gets buffed. It seems to be that that's simply a cycle that continually goes on. And so eventually I'd like to do something that's specific to that. The sixth thing that we need to talk about is the 315 economy. This, again, could go for its own video discussion, but for today, I just wanted to point some things out. It is fascinating. Those of you who have been around the G3 channel for a while, you know I love in-game economics. I love interacting with digital economies inside games, as well as interacting with real-world economies. It's a fun thing. It's an exciting thing. It's something that you can learn a lot about and draw a lot of applications from about games and about the real world outside of games in general as well. So here we've got 4 different graphs. We've got the current Exalt prices from Expedition. We've got the Exalt prices from Ultimatum, Exalt prices from Ritual, and Exalt prices from Heist. This is not an exhaustive list or example. I've simply pulled these prices up to show you that there are definitely some variations in the different leagues that we've experienced over the last 4 leagues, over the last year, inside Path of Exile. And one of the most interesting things, and why I think this needs its own discussion unto itself, is just really digging into the nitty-gritty details of what exactly about Expedition makes it so that way it is, at the moment, a relatively consistent economy across the board. And if you look at snapshots of the economy prior to Delirium during COVID, when COVID first kind of announced a lot of worldwide lockdowns, that league in and of itself saw a massive change to the economy. A lot of things changed when Delirium came out, and ever since then, the economy inside Softcore Trade League has been somewhat unstable. Things aren't necessarily predictable league after league after league after league, and prior to Delirium, things looked, for the most part, like what you see here today during the 315 Expedition economy. That's not to say that every single item, I can already hear some of you shouting out examples where prices vary and exceptions to that. So this is a general statement. I'm not making specifics here. This is why this needs to be its own discussion video, is to say that in general, you could look league to league and see that if an item was not nerfed, if a build related to an item was not nerfed, if a drop rate was not changed, if a new divination card was not introduced into the game to allow you to target farm a specific currency or a specific item, then you could pretty much say that the previous league's economy would look similar in some pretty overlapping ways to the current league. Since Delirium, that has not been the case. Since Delirium, we've seen massive price differences in mirrors, in headhunters, in chevrons. We've seen massive differences and drops in exalted prices, in delirium orbs, in various even low-level spammable currency like alterations. There's a ton of different things that have really widely varied since Delirium, and it's interesting and it deserves its own discussion unto itself. But it is fascinating to look at. I would encourage those of you who are economy junkies like me to just go look at POE Antiquary and go take a look at some of the older leagues and compare them to where we're at in Expedition, and then compare them to where we've been at over the last year, basically since Delirium dropped. Our 7th topic today is finding enjoyment while leveling. This is something that constantly is coming up, and Grinding Gear Games is continually having to answer questions about alternative means of leveling. I've got a harsh truth for you today, all right? Some of you are going to be upset about this, so be it. I just have to say a harsh truth. If you do not enjoy leveling new characters, then you are not within Grinding Gear Games' target audience for the biggest portions of their development processes. You're not. Path of Exile 2 is primarily coming as, yes, a rework of a whole lot of different systems, including the gem system, including our character models, including the way how we interact with currency, including the speed of the game. Lots of different things are coming with PoE 2. But the gameplay of PoE 2 is primarily going to be driven through a new act campaign that gets us to the end game. In other words, the primary portions of GGG's development process for PoE 2 are about the leveling experience. It's with another campaign. So if you don't enjoy leveling new characters, I see a whole lot of players out there, whether they're big-time figureheads inside the Path of Exile community, or whether they are just like you and me and they're rather casual players and they don't play the game for a living, they just boot up Path of Exile whenever they've got a chance and enjoy it. Players across the board who are vocal about hoping for Path of Exile 2 to be this messiah-like, savior-like entity that will solve all of their problems, like that's not necessarily what PoE 2 is being designed to do. If you look at all of the communication about Path of Exile 2 and you're following and you're tracking along, it's primarily a new campaign. Now, there's other things going on in it. I don't want to undersell Path of Exile 2. But if you don't enjoy leveling characters in Path of Exile, if you don't enjoy seeing your character take shape, if you don't enjoy pushing through barriers and achieving new player perceived abilities, then you may not enjoy Path of Exile 2, and you're probably not in the target audience for what GGG is actually designing for. You might actually be a player who is closer to the top 1% of like the best players in PoE than you are to the biggest portion of the player base, right? That's take that for what it is. It might be a harsh word. You might disagree with it, but that's something to realize. Leveling is a huge part of Path of Exile. Players who kill Kitava the first time vastly differ from the number of players who kill Kitava the second time. Players who even make it to Merveil in Act 1 are vastly different from the players who succeed in fulfilling the bandit quest and get through Act 2. Like each and every moment in Path of Exile of progression, there are players who drop off. And so the biggest portions of GGG's design development process don't necessarily deal with a lot of the things that players are talking about. End game systems and annoyances and alternative leveling solutions. Like those things all strike very particular portions of the player base that might represent even a good chunk of the player base, but that's not the primary audience that GGG is necessarily designing Path of Exile 2 to be, nor is it where they're even placing a lot of their emphasis with the Path of Exile campaign that we see now. Brutus getting reworked. How many times have we seen the acts get reworked or get tweaked or get updated? That's something that has been going on for a long time, where Grinding Gear Games is continually updating and reworking the first 4 acts of the original Path of Exile campaign. That's something that takes up a huge portion of their development process and of their design, and that shouldn't shock us. That is where most players experience Path of Exile. So you want that to be excellent. Once a player really likes that version of Path of Exile, then they're going to continue playing it, and that's where you and I are at. We're in that continued played population or percentage of the population. So I've got some tips. I've got some aspects that I do while I'm leveling that help me enjoy Path of Exile each time I play a new character. I've noticed that as I have more kids and I've got more responsibilities with work and jobs and other things, that I need to enjoy the character leveling experience more. Like if I don't enjoy that, I don't necessarily have as much time to enjoy the end game. So if the end game is all I'm going to enjoy in Path of Exile, then maybe Path of Exile isn't necessarily a game for me anymore. So I really want to enjoy and find enjoyment in the leveling process. And there is a ton to enjoy about going from a character, even in Act 1, a character that has no mobility skills, and you're just like, oh, I am the slowest person ever, and you're like going to try and fulfill the medicine chest quest just so that way you can get a movement speed flask, to then eventually getting through Act 1 and being like, all right, I got movement skills now. I feel like my character is tangibly more powerful during this particular set, the climb, etc., or wherever, Merveil's Cavern. This particular set of instances and minions and enemies, I feel much better at than I did a few minutes a go. Finding that enjoyment while you're leveling and while you're playing the game of Path of Exile is incredibly important. And if you don't enjoy playing the game, then maybe the game has passed you by and you just don't enjoy it anymore. Our 8th and final topical talk roundup point today is reworking old skills versus releasing new skills. Grinding Gear Games has communicated several times throughout time and space and history that reworks don't draw as many players as new features and skills. If Grinding Gear Games was to say, hey, we are going to do a performance league, or hey, we are going to do a rework league, or hey, we are going to do an update league where we go back and we make Breach better, we go back and we make Alva Temples better. That in and of itself, if that is the primary thing that GGG does with a league, that in and of itself is not going to draw as many players as releasing something that is new. The benefits of a rework in any game, this isn't Path of Exile specific, the benefits of a rework in any game or genre is appealing to an audience that is already somewhat familiar with the game. The only reason why anybody's in any way attracted to a rework is that they already had some concept of what something was prior to the rework, and now they've got hope for what it'll look like after the rework. So you've got to have some level of familiarity with the game as well as the rework in order to get excited about it. The benefits of a new gem or a new feature or of a new league is both for a returning audience who's coming back to the game and potentially a new audience. So you've got like your 4 quadrants of players over here, and there's more of these that you could do, but this is just an example. You got your current POE player who in general is kind of smiling, right? There are some things that are a bummer, but there are some things that aren't. They're a current POE player. Whether you do a rework or release new stuff, they're coming back probably for the most part. You've got your occasional POE player who's like, hey, I just play occasionally and I'll only come back when they fix X, Y, or Z, or when X, Y, and Z is fun anymore. There's just as much chance that something new might hook that player as doing a rework, right? The risk and reward factor for drawing that sort of player, for reworking a bunch of stuff and that player not being drawn into it anyway, it's simply not enough. The risk is too high for a relatively low reward. Then you've got your POE addict that's just like, where's my bleeping mirror drop? Where is it? They're just playing all the time no matter what. It doesn't matter if it's a new league. It doesn't matter if it's a new gem. It doesn't matter if it's a rework. It doesn't matter if it's POE 2 stuff. They're going to play POE 2, POE itself no matter what. They're addicted to the game. They love it. It is their primary game. I say that I use that word addiction lightly here. I use that as a term of affection. This is somebody who's playing POE no matter what. It doesn't matter what you do, whether you're reworking or releasing new skills. So they're coming back anyway. Then you've got folks who just like to play new games, man. They've never played POE before, and so they just like to try new stuff out. If they like to try new stuff out, then a rework definitely doesn't draw them. It really doesn't. What does have the potential to draw them is new stuff, saying, hey, here's a game where new stuff is coming out. You can experience that new stuff as a new player. It also acts kind of as a reset, right? Because a new player who might be intimidated about coming into a game that's got a huge knowledge gap between new players and veteran players like Path of Exile. Like if you're a new player, there's never a better time to enter into a game that's got a big knowledge gap than when there's something new, because then you're learning along as a new player along with the veterans, and you can actually find out in the age of internet gaming and internet information, you can find stuff out that's new about the game that somebody who had 10,000 hours into the game didn't know. You can find those things out. You can discover along with the rest of the community. And so even though you're new, you don't feel so alienated about everything else. You can ask new player questions about the new stuff, and so it's less alienating, it's less potentially off-putting for you to come in. So that is a topic that I feel like needs to be addressed. So many folks want reworks, and GGG does a decent job. They're spending more and more time of reworking and changing and hopefully redesigning content bloat, but they do that alongside reworking old skills and releasing new skills. They very clearly are trying to do both of those things. And I think that deserves a little bit of applause and a little bit of a community shout out, that Grinding Gear Games isn't just releasing only new things and always leaving old things off the books. They at least do occasionally go back and revamp some old things. And that I think is noteworthy unto itself. Well, thanks so much for joining us today for our table talk roundup thing discussion. There's a ton to talk about. I've just talked about 8 different topics here today, but there's a ton more that I have not addressed. There's Chris's entire interaction and interview with Ziz and Mathel, and there's a lot of things in there that all could be discussed. There's a lot of confusing things and maybe even potentially conflicting things that just could be discussed, not called out, but simply discussed. Then, of course, we're going to have even more interviews with Chris in the future here as not we as in the Good Guy Gaming channel, but just we as the POE community. That's all coming. So I'm very excited for all of that. There's a ton to talk about regarding POE at the moment. What's something on your mind? Drop me a comment down below. Let me know what's something that is really bugging you or interesting you at the moment, something that you are very excited about, passionate about inside Path of Exile that you would like to see discussed. Thanks once again for joining us, and I hope today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you. If you'd like any more information about the topics we chatted about today, links are provided down below in the video description. The G3 community has grown a ton over the last several years, and that's thanks to viewers like you and faithful Patreon supporters. Big shout out to longtime supporters and first-time supporters for this month.